Today's episode is brought to you by Mazars.
SoundCartel.
From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. Just as you can't expect great results without hard work, you can't expect great teams to develop without putting in the effort. Professor Martin Bean says that leaders must actively foster synergy, rather than assuming it'll occur naturally. The concept is outlined in his book, Toolkit for Turbulence, the mindset and methods that leaders need to turn adversity to advantage, co-authored by sports psychologist Graham Winter. Professor Bean tells Chris Ashmore that better decisions are made when teams are working as one.
The definition of synergy is 1 + 1 + 1 = 6. That 5 times out of 6, a team will make better decisions than individuals on their own. That's why we invest so much in team building in the workplace. But of course, teams are built. They don't just happen. And in fact, executive teams are often not teams at all. They're a bunch of individuals that come into a room to play Game of Thrones to fight for their home team. They actually don't really identify with the executive team. They identify with the team they lead, and they go into battle in the executive team to maximize their influence and the resources they get. So a lot of the work that I do is actually answering your question, which is how do we actually get them to come together and truly unlock synergy to make the best decisions, Chris. And we believe those are 3 core processes that teams have to pay constant attention to and nurture them over time, because every time a team member changes, every time circumstances changes, teams need to anchor back in what we call the ACL. And anybody that's damaged their knee, my apologies. But it's the ACL acronym is ALIGN, which is all about commitment. It's all about having a vision, values, principles, goals, budgets, prioritize, expectations and agreements. In many ways, it's the rational process, which is a term that human synergistics coined. And that's all about aligning. But we use the word commit now as well, Chris. You see a lot of teams that come and nod and say, yes, I'm aligned. But then they walk out of the room and go back to the coffee room and go, oh, you'll never believe what those lunkheads decided today. So it's not just getting people to align around the table. It's really driving commitment. The second is the C, which is where I believe most teams fall apart, Chris. And C stands for collaborate. And we describe that as sharing, what human synergistics calls the interpersonal process. And sharing is all about connecting, engaging, problem solving, co-creating, coordinating, supporting each other, challenging each other in appropriate ways. But it's also about giving a lot of yourself to other members of the team. And the final one, which is really underbaked, we believe, inside the leadership teams that we walk into, is learn, which we've taglined as adapting. And it's about having an adaptive mindset that we've talked about. It's about reflecting, constantly reflecting on how things are going. It's about relentlessly debriefing at the end of every planning moment, or at the end of meetings, or at the end of strategies. It's doing a timeout and saying, right, how did that go? What have we learned? How can we do things differently? It's about being open to feedback, but really gathering insights from the edges of your organization, from your customers, your stakeholders, your staff, walking information into the room that might only be 80% perfect, because by the time you get it 100%, it's too old. We don't have time now to wait for perfect information. How can we learn and get the right information? But it's also about having innovation spaces. And then the final one, Chris, because sometimes this all sort of sounds very human and fluffy for a lot of people, it's about having a disciplined operating rhythm. It's about throwing away your old operating rhythm and deconstructing it and reconstructing it in a way that works for you, and really rigorously applying that tempo, Chris.
Mazars is an international audit, tax and advisory firm committed to helping clients confidently build and grow their businesses. Move forward with Mazars. visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.
So you talk about ACL, align, collaborate, learn, and then that disciplined operating system. You also mentioned in the book the 5 shares, which I suppose anchors each and every person in the organisation. Can you explain the 5 shares?
I sure can. And by the way, for those listening, if you just go to our Toolkit for Turbulence.com website, the 5 shares is there and you can grab it and use it. It's explained obviously in more detail in the book, but the 5 shares are what we believe underpin a united leadership team, Chris. And it's share the big picture, which is all about a clear and meaningful and agreed purpose and vision and shared values. It's about share the reality, which is taking shared accountability for outcomes, being open to constructive feedback and having high quality debates. The third share is share the air, which is acting in ways to build trust, opening up lines of communication and actively listening to each other. The fourth is sharing the load. So treating colleagues as equal partners, prioritizing and planning together, but also collaborating away from formal meetings. It's one of the things Graham and I look for. Really high quality teams don't wait for a meeting to be called. They're sharing the load and collaborating outside the room. And the last of the 5 shares is sharing the wins and losses, paying close attention to overall results, celebrating the wins, but debriefing relentlessly as time goes on. And Chris, for each of the 5 shares, for the Star Wars fans listening, there's a dark side to each of those, and we can unpack that a little bit if you'd like, but those are the 5 shares.
Well, let's unpack that. Bring us to the dark side, Martin.
Yeah, so let's go to the dark side. So the dark side on the first is where people pursue separate agendas. So they put their own business interests ahead of the overall outcome, or they think and act at a tactical rather than a strategic level, and they sort of foster disunity in the team. The second of the dark sides is avoiding and denying, putting a spin on things, being defensive or aggressive, playing the person rather than the ball. And it's also about avoiding the tough conversations, a lot of passive defensive thinking. The third of the dark sides is stifling communication, so dismissing alternative views, blocking or over-controlling, showing a lack of care and respect. We can all think about people in teams that do that. The fourth is where we protect our own turf. We plan and prioritize in isolation. We make decisions to protect our ego and status, or we miss opportunities for integration because we're not looking for them. And the final, which is really insidious, is we walk into the room and we play I win, you lose. We look to blame others. We evade accountability as a team. And if we do that, boy, are we slow to learn and adapt, Chris. So we use the 5 shares, the positives and the dark side, as a way of actively diagnosing where our team is at right now and where we believe we need to pay attention. And I run an exercise with teams, and the people listening to this podcast can do it for themselves. Just put the 5 shares up on a wall. Let everybody rate where they think their strengths and weaknesses are, and hold on to your hat, because you're in for a wild ride about how your team really feels the team is acting and behaving. But if you've got the courage to do it, and do it once, twice, 3 times a year, I guarantee you'll open up a much more ACL type environment for your team to work in, Chris.
Last question. A lot of organisations, particularly bigger organisations, but even small businesses, they might have teams that are isolated from each other. Not just teams either. You've got different levels of management versus people on the shop floor, let's say. How do you overcome those barriers between different peoples and bring everyone together on the same page?
Yeah, well, the first thing is it's not going to happen because somebody at the top says it should happen. It's not going to happen because you wrote a bunch of values into your annual report and stuck it on a shelf. It's not going to happen because you just think because you're paying people that they should act and behave in ways that are going to break down those silos and create an ACL united sort of workplace environment, Chris. Teams are built. Organizations are built. They don't just happen. So a few quick thoughts then. Number one is you've got to involve all of your people in developing the culture and values of your organization. and it's got to be authentic. It can't be so beautifully homogenized by your marketing team that nobody recognizes them, nobody can live them, nobody can practice them every day. Second, once you've got those values, once they're authentic and people have contributed to them, a little mantra that my team lived by, Chris, what you walk past, you condone. So if as the leaders of the organization, you see people acting and behaving in ways that aren't true to those authentic values and you walk past it, or you don't take those people on, then you've condoned it. And that will erode trust and confidence to actually break down the hierarchical barriers or the organizational barriers. And the third one that I just share with you, Chris, is that, and there's a lot of leadership that's been written around this over the last few years, but it's really that notion of servant-led leadership. What I talk about, leadership through care. It's not paying lip service to really caring about every individual in the organization. It's living it every day. And that doesn't mean you don't make tough decisions. It doesn't mean you won't make decisions that will hurt people. But it is about, if you have to make those decisions, you treat people with dignity, respect, and transparency as you do it. And if you live by those principles, you'd be amazed how you can break those barriers down, unlock people out of their silos, build an aligned, collaborative learning culture. And that's where, just as, we talked about other leaders in other podcasts, they unlock the real value inside their organizations, which is the power of their people, Chris.
That was Professor Martin Bean, CEO of the Bean Centre. To order a copy of his new book, Toolkit for Turbulence, head to the link in the show notes of this episode. Business Essentials Daily is a SoundCartel podcast. Producers are Nick Schildberger, Chris Ashmore, Jeff Waters and myself. Technical production by Pete Letts. I'm Nicole Goodman. Thanks for listening. We'll bring you more Be Daily next week. SoundCartel. This episode was brought to you by Mazars. To find out more, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.